Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Matt. If you didn't know, welcome. Thank you all for being here. It's 5 o'clock, and as most of you know, we do have a city council meeting at 6 p.m. But again, I know I've talked to so many of you, I have so many familiar faces, and I've talked to so many of you about the issue of this little round table. It was going to be a round table, we'd just have a nice intimate setting at that back table, but we're up here now, and we'll try to keep it informal as possible. I'm only wearing a tie because I'm swearing in a couple firefighters later, and I don't want to ruin their picture like I usually do. That was a joke. Sorry. I'm trying. So whether we leave after 55 minutes, again, I'm going to have to stop at 5:55. Whether we leave at 55 minutes disagreeing on some things, I know that one thing we can all agree on is everybody in this room wants Anacortes to be a better place. So let's take that before we go on. I'm going to try to do a little survey here. How many of you are here because you want action from your local government? Yeah, okay, that's why you're here. How many think it's good or compassionate to allow people to live on the street? Yeah, there's maybe one or two. How many people think the city is doing nothing about this? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay, that's fair. So I'm going to answer some of that a little bit because I don't think the city is doing nothing about this. So I've responded to a couple of you all who have come to council meetings to address the council. And don't worry, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you all to continue to address. And I've received many, would I say, fair and unfortunately common complaints about health and safety, to include folks living on the street, since I took office in January. So this continues to be an issue that's certainly counter to our priority of keeping Anacortes safe and healthy. We believe in evaluating all the options in this area. We have and we will continue to use all the tactics that we have. We have had some success on T Avenue removing many various RV camps. At one point on T Avenue in particular, we had 14 RVs and cars being used for living quarters. Most recent count, and Chief Floyd has confirmed that, between 4, I never like to have a solid number because 4 and 6, because they are mobile. I agree that most people think it should be 0. Sometimes our police officers are frustrated in the field, not because they don't feel like they get local support, but it's more like they don't have state laws and courts to support them to effectively do their job. So how we've been approaching this issue for folks that might be living on our streets is, number one, checking to see that there are critical services these individuals might require. And so when those who raised your hands and said we're not doing anything, I've got some numbers for you. Since late 2021, we've had 738 contacts with 75 individuals who have been living on the streets, and many of them we've got to relocate. And of those folks that are left, between 6 and 8, depending on who's jammed in the vehicles, those have received 205 contacts. And that's just our contract social worker. That doesn't include the Salvation Army, doesn't include Helping Hands, that doesn't include Community Action, or the many other organizations that are trying to help folks that are living outside. Number 2, we provide formal notice to move or be towed, typically 72 hours in accordance with our city ordinances. And then finally, number 3, we enforce our public nuisance codes, specifically AMC 906040. And I'm pleased that later on tonight, Council has given us some updates to those codes that we'll talk about after our at tonight's council meeting. So I've said before, I'm not mayor of the world. I am mayor of Anacortes, and if you're showing up in Anacortes with no family ties, resources, or local prospects and want to live on the streets, I'm going to ask you to move on. And there is no evidence that this problem is getting worse. I know that some individuals, the situations around some of those vehicles are getting worse, but we take it very seriously when somebody just decides to come in and violate our codes. But the city takes seriously the housing needs and public safety of our community. We'll enforce the law, and in some cases, some of these street dwellers have continued to refuse the extensive resources to help change their status, and they continue to disrupt law-abiding citizens, businesses, and property owners and make neighbors feel unsafe. Unfortunately, this process is not as fast as we'd like. I can assure you it's a top priority for my staff. With APD in the lead, we are working daily on this issue and exploring every options in the face of recent court decisions that make it very challenging. I'll just rattle off a few of them. Lavon, Ellis, Long, and Boise are examples of some of those court cases. The recent laws regarding drug possession, in effect since July 2021, commonly referred to as Blake decision, is yet another challenge, making it difficult to achieve any quick results. Blake court decisions and subsequent legislative fix required 2 referrals to drug treatment prior to an arrest, a misdemeanor arrest that rarely includes jail booking. I believe that would speed the process and change the trajectory of at least some of these folks. I'll be continuing to work with Chief Lloyd, with the help of our legal team, our outreach team, and anyone willing to help work and explore strategies to reduce this blight on our beautiful city. So in the areas I've attempted to address with legislation, support of the other mayors of Skagit County as a minimum would lead to a sense of order in enforcing the laws, where the 17,880 residents of Anacortes who follow the law, I believe some of those changes with the state law would help us with this issue. So with that, I will, if Chief Floyd has anything to say, but we'll endeavor to try to answer any of your questions. And I've got Councilman Carter who's willing to bring the mic around to you so we can try to have a more of an informal conversation. So with that, raise your hand and Jeremy will come over and give you the microphone.
I read online about a collaborative with Skagit County. I think you've made reference to it very briefly in a council meeting between, I think, Anacortes, Cedar-Woolley, Mount Vernon, about 4 or 5 different, and is there a consultant I read about online, and then there's a written plan online, and it's a multi-year. Can you speak to that?
I think what you're talking about is the North Star Project, and the North Star Project is a collaborative, like you said. It's all the city mayors in Skagit County, and as well as county commissioners are in the leadership part, and it is trying to make the most effective use of behavioral health money and homelessness issues. It's a combination of the 2 issues. So it is trying to figure out what we're all trying to solve, of the nexus of why are people, living unhoused, whether it's economic conditions, whether it's mental illness, whether it's drug issues, all of those things. The point of the North Star Project is to try to collaborate. We have a whole box of them. All right, that one's green. These are both red. So more to follow. The city of Anacortes was actually out in front of the North Star Project. The citizens of Anacortes voted for a sales tax increase to support low-income housing and with the Anacortes Family Center and the Anacortes Housing Authority. The county followed late, and the other cities followed late with their own sales tax increases, and they're trying to figure out how to best allocate those funds to work towards the problem that we're all trying to solve. So I know that wasn't a great answer. I'm optimistic that we're going to have some great solutions, but all of it takes time. The issues that I'm dealing, and I've said this publicly a number of times, the issue I'm dealing with for the most part now is a law enforcement issue, because in Anacortes we've had the resources to reach out to some of these folks that are living on the streets, and including myself personally, half a dozen times. So that's a real challenge, but I'm optimistic the North Star is going to help keep the problem from getting worse.
Mayor, has the legislative priorities discussions come to a conclusion, and do you have those amongst the various cities have that saucered and blown and published?
Again, like I briefly signed up with with all the other Mount Vernon, Cedar-Woolley, and Burlington, we sent a letter off to all of our representatives with regards to primarily the Blake decision, which is drug reform issues, and police pursuits, juvenile questioning, and the use of our Justice Center. So that was separate. The council will be addressing legislative priorities as we normally do, hopefully as we work through the budget. But again, law enforcement reform, I think everybody's on the same page. Blake decision was a little bit of an overreach. I think I've talked to our reps a couple times. I think they all feel like, okay, this is not very practical. Here's a card to go get drug treatment for someplace that doesn't necessarily accept you. Here's a second because possessing, fentanyl. Go see somebody. And the third time we come visit you for drug contact, we can give you a misdemeanor citation. That's not effective. It used to be a Class C felony. The drug courts were pretty darn effective when somebody was arrested for a Class C felony and you went to jail and they released you and you showed up to court and you could get the drug treatment, and there was a pretty big kind of hammer over your head to kind of change your trajectory from death, jail, or recovery. I mean, those are the trajectories for, and we all want recovery. But that the drug court, that people would go to their treatment because they didn't want to go to jail. So that's, but I think the negotiation with the legislature might get back to a gross misdemeanor, but I think that's something that certainly all the mayors really around the state agree that that decision and the legislative fix was not a good one. Anybody have questions for my awesome police chief, our awesome police chief?
There. What are the options if, like our residents on T Avenue, they just refuse any help and they're still there? And they've been refusing it for almost a year, and you're going to pass ordinances or whatever, and they just go, okay. So what kind of rules, regulations, ordinances, laws can you come up with to combat Olympia that will remove them from our streets?
So Matt Miller's opinion is changing those drug laws, because they're, I know people argue with me, and that's fine, you can disagree, but very few of those people do not have some involvement with what we consider illicit drugs. I'm not talking about weed. So we don't arrest for that. These are citations, or it's a referral, and go see a a misdemeanor citation, where a year and a half ago it was a Class C felony for a lot of this stuff. So, so I don't own, as a municipality, we only own misdemeanors, so 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine essentially, and so we've got littering, public nuisance, all those things that turn into citations, yeah. And
for all of this, we've already gone through all of this already, and they know the law well, and they're not moving, and they're fine. They've got free trash pickup. The vacuum truck was just there this past week cleaning out the storm drain, because that's where they're dumping all their sewage. They're fully aware of what their legal rights are. So with the ordinances coming up and changes that you're making, how can that change what we're living with on T Avenue? Because they know they don't have to move. It's their home.
So I would say that trash pickup isn't free, because every time we send our city trucks out there to pick up the trash, they get charged into court for that. They're receiving littering court dates. When the Vector truck was out there, they're being charged for illegal dumping of wastewater. So our response to come out and clean that up when they're unwilling to do so, the city does incur costs for that, but we're not passing it along to them as a free service, because they're having to go to court and answer for that. What I will say is all of the individuals that you're referring to, we've taken enforcement action on numerous occasions. I can't control the judge's actions in court. There's some of those individuals that have currently 6 open cases for pending charges where we've charged them for their actions. And unfortunately, once it gets to the courts, I don't really have any control over that. I know our prosecutors have been lobbying the courts to give jail time, and from what I can tell, the judges are apprehensive to give jail time for a littering case, essentially. But that's not for lack of effort on the part of my staff.
Thing that we can do to help? I mean, I've written to the legislatures about some of the laws that have been changed, and I don't get any response. So is there something else or somebody else we could write to or do something about it?
Yeah, I would advise you to continue to contact your legislators, be very persistent, and
Ones. Which legislators would you recommend? Because I've written to several, and I don't get anything back. They tell me that they received my emails, but nothing else happens. Do you have a list of people that we should be contacting, or?
Well, our 40th representatives are Alex Rammel, Deborah Lekinoff, and then Senator Liz Lovelet. So that's the 40th. Anacortes is inside the 40th district. Apparently we needed to do a battery check earlier.
Hi. Here's one question that I have regarding T Avenue. You have 72-hour parking right now, and I believe Ryan is working on that writing, and we're going to hear about that tonight. Is there a way that you can create permitted parking? We know that there are businesses that need their trucks to park there longer than 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours. But why can't we institute permitted parking that is, 24 hours, not 72. You don't move your RV 6 inches, 12 feet, whatever it is. You can't have it towed. It has to be able to move on its own. And so I'm just wondering if the city can throw in something that's permitted that allows those businesses that are down there that need the traffic, the freight companies to be parked overnight to be there, but the RVs not.
I'll let the chief try to answer that one, but it's the same, the ordinances are the ordinances. I own the misdemeanor, so, towing, we didn't talk about our city attorneys here also to back me up on things like the Homestead Act when somebody's living in their vehicle. There's a lot of challenges with towing vehicles regardless of what ordinance is on there. So maybe you can touch on that, Chief.
Yeah, currently, there is provisions in the ordinance for towing vehicles with 24 hours notice if the licensing is not current or it's not in running condition. However, the individuals living in there present the challenge we have with Martin versus City of Boise, where prior to taking enforcement action and removing that vehicle, I have to be able to offer them an alternative place to go. And that's not just offering it for one night. I have to offer them an alternative place to go. So First Steps is the only low barrier shelter in Skagit County. They have a 90-day program, and there's a process to get in there. I have the ability to offer them 1 to 2 nights because they have a certain number of their small living units set aside for emergency shelter, but to permanently remove an RV that's someone's residence, I have to offer them an alternative place to go before taking that action.
Yeah, for the chief, as far as running the vehicle license plate to find out if there are any violations, when you mentioned if it was non-compliant, up to date, or had been from a different part of the state involved in a crime or any other misdemeanors on the vehicle license plate itself. I don't know if you, has that had any effect as far as having them moved?
So again, the only real effect that has is if the licensing is not current, that makes it eligible for a 24-hour impound as opposed to 72. Beyond that, it's the same ordinance that we would be using and enforcing for compliance there. But if they're living in the vehicle, that changes the status of that. As far as issuing infractions, if the license is just not current to begin with, the enforcement specific to that is only enforceable if the vehicle's underway on a city roadway. Does that answer your question? So when we would check that license plate, if it has been involved in a crime in another part of the state and another agency is looking for that vehicle, it would show up in our statewide computer system, and they could request actions be taken at that time if they have a search warrant to impound it or something like that, for example. But absent that, then no, it would not change anything. No.
Yeah, as you've spoken about, and as we know, drugs are a great contributing factor to people finding themselves slipping into unhoused situations and also continuing their misery. But yet, right across the street where I live, there's an active drug house, and there are drug deals going on there right now, at this moment. And I'm just really curious why you guys don't do something about it. We've interacted with you before, but it continues. And we've been 10 years of interaction with the PD, and we still have this situation. So I really think if you could close that drug house down, that would stop a lot of those people from T Avenue coming into our neighborhood and buying drugs. It's an ongoing thing. Anybody want to take a field trip? Feel free. I'll take you down there. You can see what an active drug house is like.
I would like to ask what house he's talking about first, and then I can talk to him individually if there's something. I'm not sure if it's a house that would be actively under investigation, and if so, then we can talk about that aside.
We do maintain a list of, I don't want to call them problem houses, but where code enforcement is another tool that we have in our toolbox, in addition to, like I talked about, the drug possession thing made it a lot easier for the police officers to do their job in that respect, because it's pretty easy to arrest somebody for possession when it's a Class C felony. But when we don't have police officers sitting on every one of these houses all of the time. And there's probably there's at least 10 with known code violations, whether some of those are known drug houses. We do have a member of APD that's on the drug task force. And we work them all as much as we can. But I don't know, maybe you can add more about the witness part. It's one thing for a citizen to witness what they think is a drug deal, which very may well be, but it's a whole different thing for law enforcement. Maybe you can help me out with that one.
Yeah, for the cases involving individuals that are distributing drugs, the easiest way to get to that dealer is individuals that have user level amounts, and then the prosecutor entering into some type of agreement with that individual to work off their case, and allowing us to work up the chain to the larger scale dealers. With the challenges we've had, unable to enforce some of the lower level user amounts, it makes it much more challenging to get to the higher level distributors. And even when I was a detective working drug cases 15 years ago, those cases are long, drawn-out investigations, and understandably very frustrating for the neighborhood, because they don't see activity from law enforcement day to day, even though there is stuff going on behind the scenes. So even at the best of times, they are lengthy investigations, and that is certainly not the case now when we have many more challenges that restrict our ability to efficiently conduct those investigations.
And I've talked to a number of you individually, well, maybe you're in the room or not, that, asking for more police patrols in front of the suspected drug house, and I had to mention, like, well, that's actually the opposite of what we want right now because we're actively working that. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but it's a huge challenge. And again, I would refer back to Blake as making it even more difficult.
Hi, my name's Rebecca, and I wanted to address the gentleman who has the drug house across the street. Wanted to let you know that what you have to do is you have to call the cops every single time something goes down. They cannot do anything without documentation. And you need to get together with your neighbors. Everybody needs to be on the same page, write letters, get the city involved. I went through this myself. It took me 6 years to get a drug house shut down across the street. It took me 6 years. And I finally got it done, and it was worth it. So you do have to do that. The police can't just come in and do what you want them to do. They have to have documentation. You have to put the power in their hands to be able to do something to help you. So the onus is going to be on you and your neighbors to get done what you need to get done. They can't do that for you. That's on you. So the second thing I wanted to say is that I've been looking at different cities and what they're doing about this problem. And it's less than ideal, but one of the things that I've seen come up over and over again is you set aside a piece of land, call it District 9, whatever you want, and they have to be moved to that spot. And if they defecate, if they do drugs, if they're passed out, if they're actively got a needle hanging out of their arm, then they got to go. And it's a transient situation. So say they have 2 weeks that they can go to this designated spot. I don't know where to put it. I won't say March's Point. They'll come and hunt me down. But maybe McNeil Island. They got a lot of space. So my point is that's what I've seen a lot of cities doing, is that they've actually set aside a piece of land. And I mean, I think it would be cool to build little tiny houses and try to help people have a life, uplift them and not tear them down further. They're already as low as they can get before they're dead. So, I'm all about compassion, but compassion with a hard edge to it, with a razor's edge to it. So that's what I've read about, is putting them on a piece of land. You have 14 days to find other accommodations and get out. So, that would be a full change of city ordinance indeed. But anyway, that's all I got.
Well, I certainly appreciate that comment. But just think about the folks I'm talking about, 6 to 8 folks on T Avenue. We've already offered them all opportunities to go to other places. So how would that be different to go to this piece of land? Again, I love the idea. I'm looking for any and all ideas.
Would you be able to detail the options that you provided them?
Yeah, I think to some extent we can do that. There's a little, so we contract, and I see Dustin here, thanks for coming. We contract with the Anacortes Family Center to help us with this outreach program, along with our police department, along with our community paramedic. We have a pretty, certainly compassionate and hardworking team that reaches out to these folks to try to get them to a better state, and have been successful. I can read them my stats again, and that was just my rough brush of some of the contacts that are made. But we have a contract with them, and they've helped us out significantly. But getting them to move is the challenge, and maybe you can address the getting them to move and what we've done before as far as trying to set up trash containers and things like that.
You've definitely established that you're trying to get them to move, but again, in terms of the actual options that you're providing, in locations, in terms of, you said that there is limited options in terms of drug treatment if you're giving a card to go to drug treatment that may not accept the person. What are the actual sort of concrete options that are being provided to these people?
So through our outreach team in the Family Center, we've offered substance abuse treatment. We've offered assistance in obtaining employment. We've offered alternatives for housing. We've offered behavioral and mental health treatment. We've offered food support, gas cards, assistance in obtaining your identification documents, license, social security card to help make you employable. We've offered medical care with our community paramedic. We've offered, I'm sure there's a number of things I'm forgetting, but our family center outreach representatives are actually here. They can probably tell you much more efficiently than I just know that there's virtually no need that they can't assist with or have the resource to be able to point you towards. And there's just a certain segment of people that are left that are unwilling to accept what we're offering because they want to live on the street and go by their rules, and they're offended when our outreach team stops by at 11 o'clock in the morning and wakes them up. And you know, they refuse to go to any of the housing alternatives because in those housing alternatives they can't do drugs out in the open or have them on the premises at all. So,
and I guess I'm speaking as a social worker and someone who's worked in drug and alcohol for a number of years. There's a real strong evidence base for a housing first model, because if people are in active addiction, they cannot merely cease using. They'll become very ill. It can be physically very dangerous depending on their substance. And so I guess it sounds like there's a really great program at place in terms of outreach, in terms of offering options. But again, in terms of those housing options, if people aren't actually able to live there because their current living circumstances preclude them from accessing those services, I am curious about what it would look like to have a designated area that people could be moved to if there weren't options. If you can't move them without another location from which for them to reside.
yeah, and the city has explored many of those same options with various parcels that the city owns, and we've consistently run into the same issues. First and foremost, nobody wants that next door to their house, which we can all understand. Second of all, given the example that you give earlier, if they have 2 weeks here and then they need to move on, what we've experienced is the same thing we've seen on T Avenue. Many of these RVs don't run, so you get them to this designated location and now they don't run, they don't want to leave, they have no motivation to try to better their situation, so you've got the same problem essentially, you just moved it to a different area.
And we've had this debate, and I was on council for 8 years before this job, and we've had the debate over the years, and it comes down to numbers. We're down to, again, I know there's more problems than just T Avenue, but 6 to 8, again, depending on what significant other is in that vehicle. We're down to 6 to 8 people. Population 17,880. The math really doesn't pan out to create some sort of village where that happens, because again, we're able to offer those services, but we're down to a few folks. I've said it publicly, I have to at some point take my social worker hat off, and I have to answer the 17,800 people in Anacortes that are following the rules, following the laws, regardless of what their circumstances are. So that's where I am with the folks that are left. And all right, lots of hands.
Mayor, Chief, in the back, thank you very much for hosting this tonight. I think the community is great. At last week's city council meeting, you mentioned that you had, Chief had some applicants for the force, and if you had hired them last week, it may not be until next August they'd be on the beat. A misspeak, or if that's accurate, but if that is accurate, can you talk a little bit about the levy lid and the thoughts that are going into that, the timeline for that, and what the community could see with that?
Yeah, what I mentioned at council meeting for law enforcement, we have 20, and Chief will kick me and correct me if I'm wrong, 28 commissioned police officers authorized. We currently have 24 on staff. We are very lucky in that realm. A neighboring law enforcement agency authorized 18 on staff. They have 7. The Skagit County, I just talked to Sheriff McDermott. They're down 17. I think they're authorized 56. I might not have that number right. So what I was pointing out that we have 2 interviewed for 4 spots. And 3 or 4 years ago, before the national excitement over in law enforcement and how to do it, we would have 15 candidates for those 4 spots. We had 4, I think, and maybe 3 interviewed. And they are entry level, which means they've got to go to the academy, they've got to do all that training, so that's what I meant by the time they're on there for August. Levy lift lid, we have a plan to bring a levy lift lid, which allows additional property tax funding for additional police officers and firefighters. Coming up, we think we're going to target April timeframe, so that can help us, but it's not a quick response, I guess.
Hello. Yes. My question is, everything we hear is how to get people to move on. We don't want them on the streets and stuff like how to get them. But why are they coming here? What is creating their want to be here?
So the majority of our folks, I'd say out there right now, all but one are from here. I know that there's a misconception that a lot of these individuals are coming from other areas, and the reality is that's a very extremely small percentage. Most of the individuals that are out there on the streets have been and are Anacortes residents. They were Anacortes residents prior to being homeless, and our outreach team has been really good about contacting individuals, and if they are from other areas, we pretty quickly direct them back to wherever they came from and the outreach service coordinating teams from those areas, so we can appropriately spend the resources on the individuals that do belong to us.
Yes. So we're talking about a lot of abstract concepts, moving people out of town, shifting around. Our nights are getting colder, and there are people who are sleeping out. What are we doing immediately to prevent people from freezing to death at night? Are we doing anything concrete to make sure that our houseless residents are safe during the winter?
As I mentioned earlier, the First Step Center does have a number of the single living units set aside for emergency shelter, so individuals that don't have a place to go when the temperatures are extreme are welcome to go there, but we cannot force them to go somewhere if they don't want to. They have to be willing to accept that. We also have, in years past, and I'm not sure if we're going to have it this year, but there's been cold weather shelters where we have made arrangements and the funding source through the county. When that was discussed earlier this year, the problem, as I understood it, was there was not anyone that was willing to step up and run that because it is a labor-intensive program.
That gentleman has.
Chief City Attorney, Bart Pastorino. I had a question regarding the budget and your open requisitions. My understanding is that you're looking for a part-time park enforcement officer and that you're looking to hire an assistant criminal prosecutor. Looking at the positions, can you hear me now? Thank you.
Got to eat them.
Looking at the positions, it seems that the duties of the park enforcement officer have to do with this problem of the junk cars and the RVs, and that the spillover from that would seem to be these people that are homeless or drug people that are creating multiple cases, the assistant criminal prosecutor. So my question is this, is that based on those facts, it seems like you're looking to put money into what you've explained as a open-ended problem, and that there's no help from the state and the county and the local officials. So I'm trying to understand why we would put money into further hires when the city is not enforcing the public nuisance statutes to the full extent that they could. And for example, in Island County, they put a man in jail for having junk RV on private property, and Spokane County is enforcing those to the full extent. So it's a direct question to you, Chief, and City Attorney, if you'd like to answer. Why is it that the public nuisance statutes, the ordinances, are not being enforced to the full extent possible? Thank you.
Well, I'm gonna jump in. I disagree that they're not being enforced. What you're talking about is when you talk about putting people in jail, you're talking about punishment, and that's a judge. But go ahead and take a stab at that, City Attorney.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the challenges that the city of Anacortes and every local agency in the western United States is facing is that our ability to enforce ordinances like nuisance ordinances against folks who are experiencing homelessness has been hobbled by some recent Ninth Circuit court cases. Chief Floyd mentioned Martin versus Boise. And let me so the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case, it decided that it was a violation of people's constitutional rights under the Eighth Amendment to not be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment for having enforcement action taken against them for camping if there's not an alternative place for them to go. So in essence, the court has told us you can't criminalize being homeless. And that case was there was a petition for cert that went to the United States Supreme Court, which was denied. And so that is now the law as it stands in all of the states in the Ninth Circuit. So understanding that that's United States constitutional law, so that's the supreme law of the land. So what that means for every agency in the western United States is that our first responders, our officers, are facing civil rights lawsuits if they take enforcement action against people in violation of the Martin case. And so I would say that we are enforcing our ordinances to the fullest extent of the law, but the mayor and the chief are doing everything that they can to find the right solutions that don't violate constitutional rights. And that's the right thing to do. So, and we continue to work on ways to do that, continue to find solutions that honor those constitutional rights while dealing with public safety issues as they come up, but it's a challenge. And it's not a challenge that the city of Anacortes created, and it's certainly not a challenge that that we anticipated. But this is a new landscape since 2019, and I think agencies all over the western United States are trying to find their way.
What is it that Anacortes knows that Island County or successful use of Spokane County doesn't know? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I'm not sure exactly what situations you're talking about, but one of the situations you mentioned was enforcement of an RV on private property. That's an entirely different issue than the city as a government actor taking action against somebody on public property. So T Avenue is a public street, so that's apples and oranges. So there are certainly jurisdictions that are pushing those boundaries. There was a case that came out last month, Grants Pass in Oregon, where they were trying to push enforcement of their anti-camping ordinance, and the Ninth Circuit again found that that was an unconstitutional violation of those individuals' Eighth Amendment rights. So I think the city of Anacortes, and I can tell you, I communicate with and go to seminars with all of the municipal attorneys in the state of Washington. We are all having the exact same conversation. So Anacortes is not refusing to do something that we otherwise could. We're trying to find the right path forward within the framework that we've all had to deal with. So.
The homelessness issue is a different issue than the drug house issue. You have ordinances on the books. Other municipalities and other government entities have used. So what's the problem? Are you afraid of that? To the point where somebody might say it's unconstitutional?
No, I don't think that nobody's afraid of using ordinances. And as the mayor said, there is, these are not one-size-fits-all situations, right? So we, in fact, recently have looked at a number of houses in Anacortes and had to identify the right strategy to deal with problematic activity on each of those properties. So it's not to say that, well, they did this someplace else, you ought to be able to do it here. It is not an accurate reflection of what actually comes up when these individual situations have to be taken into account. So there has certainly been situations where our civil code enforcement, our building officials have pursued nuisance actions against folks, and in some cases they've been successful, in some cases they haven't. So
to summarize, you're not using all the laws that are on books to the full extent, but you want more.
yeah, I don't think that's an accurate summary of what I just said.
I was waiting to jump in here, Mr. Castrino.
Well, and let me add one more thing, that you'll notice that the final version of the budget that's before City Council doesn't include an additional assistant city attorney, so I'll leave it with that.
That's a desire of one or two members of council. That's up for discussion. We're currently getting the services, I believe, from our contract prosecutor that I believe we need.
So after our previous meeting and discussion about this same topic, the mayor and I met with the building department and worked on some administrative codes that we can use to address the problem houses that you're referencing. And that still is in progress. We've had varying degrees of success with compliance in some of those houses, and some of them that will additional fines will be forthcoming because of their lack of compliance.
And I do not have the long history, but I do not believe we have ever gone to the enforcement action of the $200 a day fine. I'm getting very close, and that's a code enforcement handled for violations of essentially building codes. And you could say drug houses, but these are problem residents. So we have about 5 of them that are under formal city warning that you need to clean up, or we're going to start fining you. So, but there's a long process, like any of this. Property rights are really important. Citizens' rights are really important. Individual rights are really important. So you can't just instantly go and crack somebody over the head and say, hey, pay this $200 a day fine. There's a process. But that's one of the processes with the code enforcement, that our code enforcement officer from the planning department will go put a sign in the yard, say you're in violation of XYZ codes, and you have X number, 90 days to comply. And then there's an appeal process, and then ultimately it gets to a $200 a day fine to the property owner. And I don't believe the city has ever collected on that fine, but if I need to, I'll make that collection.
And one of the reasons that we chose to go that route is I don't need a judge to tell me that it's okay to do that, because we have already done the legal research, and our building department has the ability to enforce those codes. And so working together to identify those houses, and then him using the codes that are available to him, I think we've saw some progress already, and we're going to continue to address those particular houses. They are a list of requirements that he has set forth for those individuals to be in compliance, and they have a set number of days to do so before the fines start.
With regard to the public nuisance ordinances, whether it's an RV or a house, this is that they allow for daily contact. So I'm trying to understand that if the goal is to move folks along, what's the challenge with enforcing
I'll be honest, I don't have the staffing to have them out there contacting someone every single day. Any given shift right now, I have a maximum of 5 if I'm lucky, but more commonly as many as 2 officers for the entire city, and that they're responsible for all the 911 calls that come in, in addition to any crimes in progress that they may see. And for them to go out and proactively issue the 72-hour infractions may not be reasonable during their work time that they have. So I have required them to be out there a minimum of once a week, and they know my desire is for much more than that, as frequently as the staffing will allow. But at minimum, they have to find time once a week to do that. And as we have more individuals available to share that call volume, then our frequency will increase.
And in the budget, and we're going to have to, we got 5 minutes, we're going to have to let somebody else talk, Mr. Pastorino. But the reason for the halftime additional parking enforcement, we've had a lot of success with the 72-hour enforcement. Again, I know you're all there, the target is 0, but we've had a decent amount of success. But let's get a couple more questions.
Mayor Miller, we have a, excuse me, sorry, we have a lady back here that's been waiting for quite some time, so I'm going to hand this over to her.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Oh, we just talked, okay.
I would imagine,
What's that?
go ahead.
Make sure it's green.
Okay, yes, it's on. Okay, Anacortes is already having a...
Really close. You got to eat these microphones.
Oh, okay. Anacortes is already having a serious problem with affordable housing, so we're about to be asked to increase our property taxes, which only increases the cost of housing, to fund more police who are not able to do the job that needs to be done. Isn't that going to be a bit of a hard sell? Maybe we could have use some creativity or maybe something, get off the dime. We came from Manzanita, Oregon. There are signs that say no camping on city streets, period, the end. And people don't. So why here? I mean, these people, it's not like we're telling them that they don't have any home. They're turtles. They take their home with them. Take their turtle and go. Here we go. I don't understand why we have to cow to this.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I would imagine that when you hand out the 72-hour notices, if not before then, that you're getting the names of all the occupants in these vehicles. And we would know if any of them have an active arrest warrant on them, and that we would have executed those if they do. That is still the law in the state of Washington. We haven't been hobbled. We can still arrest people that have an arrest warrant. They're a danger to the public. If they don't have one now, they probably will real soon, because they're going to be robbing. They're going to be thieving from our homes, from Safeway, from the liquor stores. They're carrying things out. I would think pretty quickly we could get some arrest warrants on these people, and then we don't have to worry about towing them off, because they're not going to be inside their vehicle. Next, is there anything we can do to help you? You're trying to get them up early in the morning. I'm assuming is it 10 or 11 that you're allowed to go out there and go, good morning. Maybe some of us could legally go out there and say, good morning. And if they haven't went to bed until 2 o'clock in the morning because they're high on drugs and alcohol, well then we can give them a friendly wake-up call. Maybe even have a donut for them at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I would think that would be no problem for you and might help you do your job. We just want to solve this problem.
We all want to solve the problem. Go ahead, Chief. And
I'll get to that question in a second. To the woman earlier, there is no set time in which we are allowed to start and stop. And our outreach team basically coordinates to go at a time that works best for them. We don't really have any concerns about waking these individuals up early. I'm guessing not many of them were at work the night before. But we are out there regardless of their time, at a time that works most convenient for our team members. The second part of your question is, what can you do? There's many of these crimes that we are able to still enforce that are not something that is regulated by the circuit courts. And I feel the success that we've had and that we're going to continue to have is going to be enforcing these lower level crimes, the 72-hour parking, the public urination, the leaking wastewater tanks, any of these smaller crimes that most people would think, I don't really want to call and tie up the 911 system because there may be a bigger emergency. I'm here to tell you that the dispatchers are trained to prioritize those calls. And so when you see something going on, feel free to call, because there may be an officer around the corner that isn't seeing what you're seeing at that time, and your call alerting them to the action that's going on will allow us to get there and see it ourselves in person. There are certain crimes that there's a misdemeanor exception for, so we don't have to be present and witness it to be able to charge that crime. And some of these smaller ones, we do have to witness, so it just depends on the situation. But I would encourage you to call as soon as you see these things, and if there's an officer that is able to respond, we will definitely try to do so, and they may already be in the area. Honestly, it's persistence and partnerships with the community that's going to bring this to the resolution. I know the individual from the back earlier that talked about, the prolonged efforts to shut down one of our drug houses. I would add to her comments that it took 3 search warrants there to finally get that house shut down, and that's one of the individuals that is now on T Avenue.
Okay, so I am going to have to wrap this up. I will do this again. We could talk for, I know, hours, and I know there's some great solutions out there. Please, there's a few brochures out there that we printed up that have 911 numbers, non-emergency numbers, some things that we can do. So I'd encourage you to grab one of those if you can, and I would encourage you to continue to reach out to my office and our folks, and we'll continue this dialogue. And you're welcome to stay around for the council meeting. Thank you.